Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into the world of immigration policy with a look at Tom Homan, the guy Trump wants to bring back as his border czar.
Oh, Homan. Yeah, his name's been popping up a lot lately.
He has, and whether you agree with him or not, there's no denying he's a key figure in this whole debate. So let's unpack who he is, what he stands for, and why he's back in the spotlight.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we start?
Well, let's start with his background.
Okay, so Homan's got this long history in immigration enforcement. Like, he started as a police officer and then became a Border Patrol agent.
And then he eventually headed up ICE's deportation branch under, get this, Obama.
Wow, under Obama. That's a pretty different picture than what we're seeing now.
Right. Talk about a career arc. It makes you wonder, how does someone go from working for a president who deported a lot of people but was also seen as pushing for reform to someone like Trump who's made family separation a signature policy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's where things get really interesting with Homan. He's actually considered the architect of that zero tolerance policy.
He was a major force behind pushing for it and even defending it publicly. Like, he said the goal wasn't to be cruel or to traumatize families, but to stop the madness at the border.
Which obviously lots of people who were separated would disagree with that.
For sure. And the effects of that policy are still being felt today, Years later, families are still fighting to be reunited. There are even lawsuits against Homan himself because of it.
Yeah. And it seems like his stance on immigration has only gotten more intense over time, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. He's using harsher and harsher language. He even uses terms like invasion to describe immigration and has called for mass deportations. Plus, he's been working with groups like Border 9/11, which advocates for local law enforcement to get involved in immigration enforcement.
So, like, they want your local police to also be acting as immigration officers.
Basically, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a pretty controversial idea.
No kidding. And to make things even more complicated, Border 9/11 is linked to the America Project, a group with ties to some pretty prominent Trump supporters, the kind who are known for promoting those election denial claims. So it's like you've got this mix of hardline immigration policies mixed in with this whole other political movement.
It's a lot to untangle, for sure. But going back to Trump and Holman, it makes you wonder what Trump sees in him.
Yeah.
Beyond just their shared views on immigration, there must be something else there.
Well, remember, Homan was the first ICE director to actually climb the ranks within the agency. He started out on the ground as a Border Patrol agent, then an investigator, then a supervisor.
So he's got that street cred, so to speak.
Exactly. He's been on the front lines of immigration enforcement, as he likes to put it. And that kind of practical experience probably appeals to Trump way more than some fancy degree or policy expertise.
And speaking of experience, it's pretty wild that he actually won the Presidential Rank Award. The highest civil service award from Obama for his work heading ICE's deportation branch.
Whoa, really? From Obama?
Yeah, from Obama. Talk about a contrast, right?
It really makes you think about how much things have changed and how his approach to immigration might have evolved over the years.
So under Obama, he was a star employee, getting awards, racking up deportations. But under Trump, he becomes the poster child for this incredibly controversial family separation policy. And now he's in line for an even bigger role if Trump gets reelected. This border czar position, that's a lot more than just the southern border, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, way more. We're talking about oversight of both the southern and northern borders, maritime security, aviation security, and leading all deportation efforts. It's a huge amount of power concentrated in one person, and it's a clear signal that we might see a return to some of the most controversial immigration policies from Trump's first term.
And Hogan's not shying away from that at all. He's already said that he wants to target undocumented immigrants regardless of criminal history, which is a complete 180 from the Biden administration's approach, which was all about focusing on deporting serious criminals and people who just crossed the border.
Right, and it's not just who gets deported, it's how they get deported. Homan has talked about bringing back workplace raids, which the Biden administration stopped doing because they were so disruptive and often resulted in people getting detained who weren't even the intended targets.
It makes you wonder, how far is Homan willing to go if Trump wins? He seems pretty eager to get back in the game.
He does, and you've probably seen him on the news talking about immigration as this invasion. Plus, he was involved in something called Project 2025, this whole set of policy proposals put together by a very conservative think tank.
Oh, what were some of those proposals?
They proposed things like increasing funding for a border wall, a massive expansion of the Border Patrol, and even higher fees for immigrants trying to come here legally.
It sounds like something straight out of an immigration hardliner's playbook. But Trump hasn't really talked about Project 2025 on the campaign trail, has he?
Not specifically, no, but a lot of the ideas in it match up pretty closely with what he's done and said about immigration before.
So even if Trump doesn't explicitly endorse it, it seems likely that a second Trump term would mean some of these ideas could actually become reality. And with Homan as border czar, he'd be the one to make it happen.
Exactly. And that's why understanding Homan is so important. He's not just a figure from the past. He's a potential key player in what could happen in the next 4 years. His vision for immigration and the methods he's willing to use to achieve it could impact a lot of people's lives. You know, it's easy to get wrapped up in the political drama of it all, but we got to remember there are real people behind all this policy talk.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're talking about families being separated, individuals detained, communities living in fear. It's easy to lose sight of that human element when we're talking about border security and all that.
Right, exactly. So let's maybe shift gears a little and focus on what Homan's appointment could actually mean for immigration policy if Trump does win. Like, what concrete changes might we see?
Yeah, let's get into the specifics.
Well, one thing's for sure, deportations are going to be a top priority. He's already hinted that he wants to go after undocumented immigrants, regardless of criminal history.
So that's a pretty big shift from the Biden administration's focus on deporting people who are considered a danger to the public or who recently crossed the border.
Huge shift. And it's not just about increasing the number of deportations, it's also about the tactics. Homan wants to bring back those workplace raids.
The ones that Biden stopped.
Yep, because they were so disruptive, they often swept up people who weren't even the intended targets.
Can you imagine the fear that would create? Not just for the people who might be detained, but for their families, their employers. Whole communities would be on edge.
Totally. It would create this atmosphere of fear and distrust, which isn't good for anyone. And then on top of that, there's the whole thing with the Alien and Sedition Acts, which Homan has said he wants to use.
Wait, hold on. Those laws are from the 1700s. They were used to silence critics of the government and target certain immigrants. He wants to use those now.
That's what he's saying. And a lot of legal experts are like, whoa, that's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's even bringing them up shows how far he might be willing to go.
It's a little scary, to be honest.
Definitely raises some eyebrows. It makes you wonder what his end game is, you know? Why is he so fixated on deportations?
Yeah, what is it about immigration that makes him come at it so hard?
Well, you got to remember, Homan views immigration as a threat. He's used words like invasion to describe it, and he seems to think that cracking down hard is the only way to protect the country.
It's like he's not interested in finding solutions that are both effective and humane. It's all about punishment.
Yeah, and, you know, there are legitimate concerns about border security and managing immigration, but Homan's approach seems to be about scaring people away from coming to the U.S. no matter what, instead of addressing the root causes of migration.
It's a bleak outlook for sure.
Yeah.
So if Homan gets his way and really pushes this deportation-heavy agenda, what does that mean for immigrants who are already here? You know, the ones who've been here a while, have families, are contributing to their communities.
Honestly, it's not a very optimistic picture. We could see way more family separations, tons of detentions, and communities living in constant fear. It would be a huge step backwards.
It's all pretty overwhelming. Is there anything people can do, or is it just a matter of waiting to see what happens?
No way. People definitely don't have to just sit back. Staying informed is huge, but we also have a voice. We can call our elected officials, support organizations fighting for immigrant rights, make our voices heard in our communities. We can do stuff.
It's easy to feel powerless when you're up against someone like Homan and the policies he's pushing, but you're right, we're not powerless.
Nope. There are tons of people out there who are worried about this stuff, and a lot of organizations doing amazing work to protect immigrants.
So, to recap, we've talked about Homan's background, his history with Trump, and what his border czar role could mean for immigration in the U.S. It's a lot to take in, and honestly, it's kind of scary.
I get it. It's heavy stuff. But I want to leave you with a little hope. The future of immigration isn't set in stone. We, as a country, have the power to shape it.
It's not just about watching it happen, then. We can actually do something.
Big time. The decisions made in the next few years, if Trump wins, will have a massive impact on people's lives. And those decisions will be influenced by what we do, by us speaking up, by the pressure we put on our elected officials.
You're saying, even though it feels bleak right now, we can't just give up. We got to act.
Exactly. We can get informed, volunteer, call our representatives, share our stories, support those organizations fighting for immigrants' rights. Every little bit helps.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to feel helpless, but we're not alone in this.
Not at all. There are tons of people all over the country who are pushing for a better, more humane immigration system, and together, we can make a difference.
Okay, so before the break, we were starting to get into the whole legal side of immigration. You said it's super complicated, so let's try to untangle it a bit. Where do we even begin with understanding all these laws?
Well, a good place to start is understanding that when we talk about immigrants, we're not talking about one big group.
Right, right.
There are actually all kinds of legal ways to come to the U.S. and different statuses people can have. It's not as simple as just legal or illegal.
Yeah, that's becoming more and more clear. You mentioned family-based, work visas, asylum. It's definitely more nuanced than I initially thought.
Exactly. And each of those categories has its own set of rules and responsibilities. Someone here on a work visa is going to have different expectations than, say, someone seeking asylum.
So walk us through some of those categories then. What are some of the most common ways people come here legally?
Sure. One of the big ones is family-based immigration. That's when a relative who's already a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident sponsors someone to come here.
Makes sense.
Then there's employment-based immigration, where an employer sponsors someone because they have specific skills that are needed.
Okay, so those are kind of the more straightforward ones, right?
Right.
What about people who are fleeing dangerous situations?
Well, that's where refugees and asylees come in. They're fleeing persecution or violence in their home countries. And the process for them is totally different than if you're coming for work or family.
And I remember you mentioning something about diversity immigrants before the break.
Oh, right, yeah. That's a lottery program for folks from countries that don't have a lot of immigration to the U.S. It's all about trying to diversify the folks who come here. And then you've got temporary protected status, or TPS, which is for people from countries facing things like war or natural disasters. It gives them temporary safety here.
Man, so many different paths, each with its own set of rules. Makes that whole legal versus illegal thing seem pretty simplistic, huh?
It really does. And that's why understanding the actual law is so important. It helps us understand how policies actually play out, what rights immigrants have, and the kind of challenges they face.
It's got to be important for seeing through the political spin, too, right? Like, helps us sort out what's true and what's not when politicians make all these claims about immigration.
Absolutely. Understanding the legal side gives you a foundation to actually evaluate those proposals, like the ones Homan's putting out there, and see if they make sense or if they're going to do more harm than good.
Which brings us back to Homan and this whole border czar thing. Knowing what we know now about how complicated immigration law really is, what are some of the biggest concerns about how he might use his power?
One big concern is that he just won't care about those legal nuances we've been talking about. He's already said he wants to target undocumented immigrants broadly, no matter their individual situation or how they got here.
And we can't forget about him talking about using the Alien and Sedition Acts. Right. Those laws are centuries old. They were designed to silence people who disagreed with the government and to target certain immigrants back then. It's kind of terrifying to think he might try to use them now.
It's definitely unsettling. Most legal scholars agree those acts are unconstitutional today, and using them would be a huge step back for civil liberties. It suggests he might be willing to ignore the law to get what he wants.
So it's not just a policy disagreement. It's like a potential disregard for the law itself.
Yeah.
And given everything we know about him, it's hard not to be worried.
I think it's totally valid to be concerned, but remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about immigration law and what these policies could actually mean, the more we can push back and fight for a system that's actually fair.
That's where it all comes full circle, right? We can't just sit around and wait to see what happens. We've got to stay informed, talk to our elected officials, support organizations fighting for immigrants, everything we've been talking about.
Exactly. We've got to remember this isn't just about abstract ideas. Immigration is about people. It's about families. It's about communities. It's about people's dreams. It's about contributions to society.
Right. We can't forget about that human element.
We have to keep those stories at the forefront and work towards solutions that are both effective and humane.
Well said. This whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener, to say the least. I think we've made it clear that if Homan does come back into power, it could have huge consequences for immigration in this country.
Definitely. Understanding how complex immigration law is, the different ways people come here, and the potential impact of these policies is essential for anyone who wants to really understand this issue.
So to everyone listening, stay curious, keep learning, and make your voice heard. The future of immigration is something that affects us all, so let's all do our part to make it a just and fair one.